Hello there! In this video we're going to learn about the MVVM design pattern. So if you don't know what MVVM is, or you just want to learn it a bit better, then this video is for you. In order to really understand the subject, we're going to create some kind of note app and we're going to make it follow the MVVM design pattern. So right now it's not working, there is only a few different fragments and adapter, but we need to add a few more things to make it work. So this entire lesson we're going to follow this chart, and this chart is going to demonstrate the way our app is going to look, and it also demonstrates the design pattern that we want to reach. Okay, so what is MVVM? MVVM is a design pattern, and a design pattern is just a way to organize and write your code. So there's a lot of different design patterns, and you can also write your code without any design pattern and it will still work. So the MVVM design pattern is one of the most popular design patterns, and you're going to see that it's very easy to build a project when you actually understand it. So let's see what is going on over here. We can see that our entire app will be divided into 3 different layers. If you understand this logic, you will understand what MVVM is all about. So the same way we divide our code into separate methods, and each method has its own responsibility, and then we also divide the code into separate classes, and each class has its own responsibility. With MVVM, we divide the code into different layers. Okay, so it's another way to divide the code and give certain responsibilities for certain groups of components or classes. Okay, so let's see what is going on over here. We can see that we have this view layer, and the view layer contains the main activity and both of the fragments. Okay, so we're going to have a home fragment that will display all of our notes, and we're going to have a fragment that is going to be used to add the note. All of these are inside the view layer, okay, and I'm going to explain to you why they're inside of the view layer. Then we're also going to have 2 view models that are going to be connected to these fragments, and they are located inside this view model layer. And afterwards, we're also going to create a repository and a room database that we're going to store our notes inside. Okay, so this is the way our app is going to look. Of course, right now we only have these fragments, we don't have any view models, we don't have the repository, we don't have room set up. So a good way to learn what MVVM is to use some kind of analogy. Okay, I like using analogies because I think they help to learn things better. So think about a restaurant. Okay, we have customers that come to the restaurant to dine. So this entire restaurant is made for the customers. The food is prepared for the customers because the customers are the one that pay to eat. Right? So everything that is going on, all the workers inside the restaurant, they all work for the customer. So in our case, the customer is the actual user of the app, okay? So we can think about some kind of user that uses our app, and the user is a customer. Now, when the customer comes into the restaurant and wants to order some food, the only workers that come in contact with him are the waiters, right? He sits at his table and the waiter comes to him and takes his order and then also brings the food to the table. So in our case, the waiters are the view layer, okay? The main activity, the fragments. So they are the ones that give the information to the user, and the user can also interact with them to order some kind of information, right? To get some kind of information. So all the input and output happens over here. So the important thing to understand is that inside the view layer, we're only going to have things that are related to the actual interaction with the user. So for example, we want to create some kind of on-click listener, we want to create some kind of view, some kind of edit text. All of this will happen inside the fragments or the main activity, obviously, because these are the waiters and they take care of the customer, and they are the only ones that take care of the customer. Next, we have this view model, and we can compare the view model to the cooks, okay? So inside the kitchen, we have cooks that cook the food, and then they bring the food out to the waiters, and the waiters take the food and bring the food to the customer. So the idea is that the cooks will never interact with the actual user. Now, there's another layer, and that's the model layer. So we can think about the model layer as the actual suppliers of the food. So for example, we have drinks, we have meats, we have bread. So every restaurant makes different orders from different suppliers, right? We want to order vegetables, we want to order meats, so the cooks will be able to prepare the food. So all of the different data sources, for example, this room database is one of these suppliers, okay? We can also have different data sources, for example, an API, right? We want to send some kind of HTTP request and get some information. Maybe we can also have some kind of location service or maybe some kind of remote database like Firebase. All of these are data suppliers, right? Data sources. So these are all the different suppliers inside our restaurant, right? They bring food to our cooks, and the cooks are the one that prepare the food and send the food to the waiters, and then the waiters send the food to the user. So it's important to understand the hierarchy, right? The cooks will never interact with the user, and the waiters will never interact with the suppliers. It will always pass through the cooks, right? So if the user ordered a salad and then the waiters need to bring him a salad, they will never go and call a supplier and tell him, can you bring me some tomatoes and cucumbers? I want to prepare a salad. No, they will go to the cooks and the cooks will take care of that because that's the responsibility of the cooks, okay? So the view model is responsible to get the data, to prepare the data, and then to send the data to the waiters. And that's the responsibility of the cooks, and no one else will do it. The views will never prepare the food. The view will never deal with the actual data, okay? He will just receive the data and bring the data to the user. And then we also have this guy over here, the repository. So think about the repository as some kind of supply manager, right? Every restaurant and even every business has some kind of supply manager that is responsible to make all of these orders, right? The cooks are checking their refrigerator in the beginning of the day and they see that they don't have enough meat, so they call the supply manager and they tell him, well, you need to order a bit more fish tomorrow and you need to order some vegetables. And then the supply manager calls the different suppliers and the suppliers bring the food to the supply manager, and then the supply manager brings the food to the kitchen. Okay? So the cooks will never pick up the phone and call the suppliers, right? They don't even have the phone of the suppliers. They only go through this supply manager, and that's the responsibility of the repository. So if we're going to have a lot of different data sources, they will all interact with the supply manager, with this repository, okay? And the repository will bring the food to the kitchen because he will know exactly what needs to be paid to these suppliers. He will know what they should bring him and things like that because that's his job, okay? And that's the point. Everyone has its own jobs, and that's the point of MVVM. We want to separate the different responsibilities into different layers, okay? So now you might think how we actually know where to write which code. Well, if the code is talking directly with the user, for example, we create an on-click listener or we find a view by ID, right? We interact with our XMLs. This will happen inside the fragments and inside the main activity. And if the code that we want to write has nothing to do with the views, then the code should go to the view model of the relevant fragment, okay? So for example, inside this home fragment, we're going to have some kind of recycle view, and the recycle view will display the different notes to the user. But then we also want to have some kind of method that will get and populate the recycle view. So even if we're going to populate the recycle view inside the home fragment, the entire logic should go inside the view model, okay? And especially the part that has nothing to do with the actual recycle view. Because first we need to get the information. So the home fragment will simply display the information, but first the view model will get the information. And the view model will talk with the repository and ask for the different nodes, and then the repository will talk with the nodes DAO, and the nodes DAO will talk with the room database and get the relevant nodes. So you can understand that there's some kind of flow, okay? There are requests and then there are responses. So the user is asking to see the nodes, then the view is asking for the view model to create these nodes or to bring these nodes, and then the view model is asking for these nodes over here, and then these ones are getting the nodes and bringing the nodes to the view model, and then the view model is bringing it to the view. So because we have all of these layers, it's very easy to organize our code and to maintain our code. Because if tomorrow we want to create another recycle view and bring other things, not just nodes, we can simply add a different method inside the view model, and then we're going to do the same request over here. So we don't have to put all of the code inside the fragment and things are going to get messy, okay? So I talked a lot, and I hope that you understood a bit of what I tried to tell you. And now we're going to finally start writing the code so you can really understand and practice how these things look, okay? But the important thing to take from all of it is that the different layers have different responsibilities, and we're not going to mix between the different responsibilities. So the first thing I like to do is to create different packages, because when we have different packages, it's also easier to know where everything is located instead of having a dozen of different activities and different fragments and classes all together, right? And this way we can also separate it into different layers. So we're going to create the first layer or the first package that is going to be called UI, okay? So the UI will be the view layer. Of course, you can call it view, you can call it presentation layer. I'm just going to call it UI. So we're going to select the activity and the two fragments, and we're going to place them inside the UI package, okay? So the activity will take a few seconds. There's always this bug that it takes a few seconds for the activity to actually move to a different place. Now inside the UI, we also want to separate it into different fragments, right? Because each fragment will have its own view model, so we don't want to have a lot of different fragments together. So we're going to create another package inside for the home and one package for the add node. Okay, so this is this home fragment and the home view model, and also this add node fragment. Okay, so we just want to separate them. So the first fragment will go into the home. We can also rename it to home fragment. And we're going to put the second one into its own package, okay? And the main activity, we can also create some kind of package and call it main. We're almost not going to touch the main activity because we don't really need to do anything inside of it. Everything will happen inside these fragments. Yeah, so it will take a few seconds for the activity to actually move. Now, as we can see over here, each fragment has its own view model. So inside both of these packages, we're going to create two view models. So we're going to have add node view model, okay? Just so we know that they are related. And inside here, we're going to create home view model. So the only thing for now we need to do inside this view model is to actually turn it into a view model, because for now it's just a class. So to do that, we're going to extend the viewModel class. So now we have both of these fragments and we have their view models. Next, we're also going to create a package for the data, okay? So we're going to create a package and name it data. And inside, we're going to create a package for the database. And if we had more data sources, we could also create packages for them. For example, remote database or a network package. Okay, but we only have a database inside this app. Well, we're going to have one. Now inside the database, we're going to create a package for the DAOs, right? And a package for the entities. Because sometimes we have more than one DAO and we have more than one entity, so we want them to be in their own packages. Now, inside this database package, we're going to create two files. The first one will be named app database, and the second one will be named repository. So this repository will be our repository, and the app database will be the actual database that we're going to use, okay? Now we're going to take this node and we're going to drag it into the entities, okay? This will be the data class of our node. And inside the DAOs, we're going to create the nodes DAO. And the DAO is the one that is going to interact with the database, okay? So this is not a tutorial about Room. This is not a tutorial about all of these things, but it is a tutorial about MVVM. And I'm not going to explain every little thing. So I really hope that you already know what is Room and how we actually create a database and how we connect it with the DAO. Of course, you can look at the things that I do and maybe you're going to learn if you never used it before. Now, the other package that I usually create is the utils package, and it's just some kind of package that is going to hold different classes, different utility classes, but for now we don't have any. So we're also going to expand this UI and we're going to drag this node recycle adapter into the home package, because the adapter is not really a fragment and it's not really any component inside this diagram, but it's simply the class of the adapter that we're going to display on the home fragment, okay? So it's logical to place it over here inside the home package. So let's start by creating the database and then we're going to connect everything. Of course, I'm also going to explain to you how MVVM comes into play and how we connect things using the MVVM design pattern. So we're going to expand the data and we're going to open our app database. And over here, I'm going to paste some code because I don't really want to type everything from scratch. So we have our database, we have this annotation of database, and of course we can use this annotation because we imported a few dependencies, right? We have the room dependencies, we also have some coroutines dependencies. So if you want all of these things to work, you need to bring inside all of these dependencies. Also, don't worry if you don't really have time to write this code, because I'm going to provide a link to this entire project in the description section. So now, because we have all of these room libraries, we can use this room annotation and then it's going to become a database. So we have a database, we also created this nodes DAO, and we also have some kind of companion object, and this is just a way to get an instance of our database, okay? So this is one of the ways we can use Room inside MVVM without dependency injection, because with dependency injection, we can just inject the different components. We can inject the DAO inside the repository, and then we can inject the repository inside the view models. But for now, we're not going to deal with dependency injection. After we finish this project, I'm going to create another video that is going to show you how to use dependency injection. And we're going to use the same project to add dependency injection on it. But in this video, we're not going to use dependency injection, so we need to do a few workarounds to be able to use room, okay? Because we cannot inject stuff one into another, so we need to create this companion object to get the instance of the database, okay? And you're going to see where we're going to use it. So now we have the database, then we're going to go inside the DAO. And over here, we'll simply have a few different queries, okay? First, we need to create the node, and then it's going to recognize it. But we have a query to add a node, we have a query to get all the nodes, and we have a query to delete a node, okay? So this is some standard queries, especially with a nodes application, right? When we add a new node, we're going to use this to add the new node to the database. This will get us all the nodes so we can display on the recycle list, and this will be used to delete one of the nodes. Next, we want to go into our entities, into the node, and we want to annotate the node with entity. Okay, so that's also an annotation that comes with room, and it makes this node into an entity. We also want to annotate this node ID to become a primary key. Okay, so now that it's recognized as an entity, it also recognized it over here. So now inside the DAO, it also recognized that we have a node entity inside the database. Okay, so right now we have the database, right? We have the nodes DAO. So the nodes DAO is used to send different queries to the database, right? Delete a node, get all the nodes, add nodes, and of course there are a lot more queries that we can add. For example, different searching queries, for example, bring me all the nodes that have a specific date or things like that. But we don't need all of that right now. So this is what the DAO does. Next, we want to be able to reach this DAO through this repository, right? Because we want to display all of our nodes inside this home fragment. So the home fragment will ask the view model, bring me all the nodes. Then the view model will ask the repository, bring me all the nodes. And then the repository will ask the DAO, bring me all the nodes. So then the DAO will use this method, bring me all the nodes. And then the database will bring all the nodes, okay? So we're going to create this repository, and inside we're going to have the exact same method because we simply want to call this method, and then the repository will call the same method inside the DAO. So we can also see that we created a reference of this DAO inside the constructor of the repository. Okay, so now the repository is the only one that will talk with the DAO. We're not going to create a reference of this DAO inside the view models, for example, because the repository is the only one that will talk with the DAO, and we can see it over here. So now let's go to our view models. First, let's start with the home view model, okay? And I'm going to paste this code, although we didn't even take care of the fragment itself. But I like to work backwards, okay? So over here we have our view model, and it has some kind of application reference because we want to be able to get an instance of this database. With dependency injection, we can actually skip this part because we're simply going to inject the repository into the view model. And then we don't need to provide a reference for the DAO. But right now we're not using dependency injection, so we cannot just create a repository without the DAO. So we do need a reference to the DAO, and the only way to get a reference to the DAO is by getting the actual database reference, and for this we need the application. So we have a reference to the repository, right? And this is just a way we actually create an instance of the repository because we need a DAO, and we get the DAO from the database itself. And then we have this live data of the list of nodes. So when we get the list of nodes, we're going to send it to the fragment, and we have both of these methods. So as I told you, we have this method again, okay? It's called populate list, but it's actually another version of get all nodes, right? So this method is going to get all the nodes from the repository, and then it's going to post all the nodes to this live data. And when this live data gets the list of nodes, it's simply going to get sent to the fragment. Because usually when the view model is talking to the fragment, it's either through live data or flows. Flows are the newest thing, but we can still use live data, and that's the way the view model is talking to the fragment. The fragment has a reference to the view model, and it observes the view model. So each time there is a change inside the view model, it simply notifies the fragment, and then the fragment gets updated. And you're going to see it when we reach the fragment. So again, I hope you know a little bit about live data because it's important to understand the way it works. And we also have this method, delete node from database. So we're going to use this method to actually delete the nodes. So inside the home fragment, we need to add the code as well. Okay, so it's code that I already created and I don't want to write it all over again. So some things are missing because we did not create the XML yet. But basically we have the view binding over here. Then we have a reference to the view model. So this is the way we create a reference to the view model. Right? We have the view model and then we call this view model provider and we supply the class itself. So now we can reference the methods inside the view model by using this instance, okay? Then we have our adapter, okay? We have the node recycle adapter. And then we just set the layout manager for the adapter and we set the adapter into the actual adapter that is inside the layout, okay? The fragment layout. Now we also have an on-click listener that will take us to the second fragment, to the add node fragment. And we have these observers. So this is the important part. We have an observer that is observing this list of nodes, okay? So each time there is a change inside the list of nodes, it's going to take the data over here and do something with this data. In our case, it simply goes into the adapter and it sets the new data, okay? So when we're going to send the data from the repository, so the repository will bring us all the nodes and store them over here, and then we're going to post all of these nodes into this list of nodes. So when the list of nodes is going to get updated, then the observer is going to know it, and then he's going to take the list and he's going to update the adapter with this list. And that's the way the fragment is interacting with the view model, okay? So that's also an important part of MVVM. The home fragment is always observing the view model. And when there's a change inside the view model, the fragment simply gets notified and does something with this information. And because the fragment is inside this view layer, it means that the only thing that he has to do is display the information to the user. That's the responsibility of the fragment. Now we're also going to add the data for our add node fragment, okay? And as I told you, the point of this video is not to understand the code, but to understand MVVM. So again, we have a reference to the view model, we have some binding, and we have a button that is going to add the actual text that the user inputted and send it to the database, okay? I first want to add all the things, and then I'm going to show you the actual app, and I'm going to explain to you how everything is connected. So now we also need to add a code inside this view model. Okay, so you really don't need to worry about the things that I added because you're going to get this entire project. I just want to run this app and show you how it works. So let's hope that everything is in order. Of course, I didn't show you this recycle view adapter, and let's see that everything, item date, let's do this, and we also have this extension that I created. So inside the utils, let's create an extensions file. And this is just some kind of extension that I created to change the Unix format into a string format. Okay, so this is the way our app looks like. So let's go into our diagram. So we can see that, first of all, we start with the view. So this is what the user actually sees. So all of these things are going to get placed into these fragments. And that's exactly what we have right now. We have these fragments that deal with showing different alerts, doing all kinds of on-click listeners, different bindings, right? We bind to this adapter, we bind to the entire view binding. So only things that are related to the actual view, to the buttons, only these things will go inside the view layer, nothing else. Now, next we have the view model layer, and the view model layer will simply mediate between the view and the repository. So the view wants to get all the nodes, so the view model will get all the nodes from the repository. The view wants to delete a node, right? The user is clicking on a node, so the view is also going to display this dialog. And then when we say yes, we want to delete this node, then the view model will simply run this method and he will tell the repository to delete a node, okay? And then of course, he's going to populate the list again because we want to get the updated view. And the same way, if the user is going to click on this add button, it's going to take us to the second fragment, to this add node fragment. So then when the user puts something inside the edit text, and then presses on add, then it's going to take the input and it's going to send it to the view model. And then the view model will not simply send it to the repository because he still needs to do a few things. So all of this logic can be inside the view model. We don't need to do this logic inside the fragment. So the view model is also getting the date, right? The current date and the current time. And then it creates a note with the content that was sent from the fragment and with the date. And then it sends this note to the repository. So the view model is not simply sending the same request, but it can also add some code to the request. It can add some things that we don't want to put inside the fragment, because all of this has nothing to do with the view. So why put it over here? We want to put here things that are only related to the view. For example, toasts. We will never show a toast inside the view model or inside a repository, only inside the fragment. So all of these things are related to the fragment, to the view. But these things are related to talking with the repository and bringing information to the fragment. So hello there. And then when we say add, then it's going to send this to the repository. The repository is going to add the node. He will ask the DAO to add the node, and then the DAO will add the node to the database. Okay? And that's exactly what we see over here, this entire flow. And then when we want to see all of this, then the repository is asking to get all the nodes, and then the view model of the home fragment is going to show us everything, okay? And then we can also click on it and delete it, or we can add more nodes. And if you did not know this about Android Studio, you can also see what is the content inside the database. So you need to go to App Inspection, and in a few seconds, it's going to open the actual database and you can see all the data inside the database. So if we go over here and we open our node entity, then we click on the node entity, we can see that we have both of these node IDs, the content, and the date. And of course, the date is saved as a Unix time, but then when we show it inside the adapter, we simply apply this extension, and this extension will simply convert the Unix time into a string that is formatted, okay? So that's why we see the actual date and time. Now we can see that everything looks exactly like our diagram. And I really hope that after this long video, you at least understand what is the logic behind MVVM. Of course, different apps will have different structures. Some apps will have more activities, more fragments, more view models, even more repositories. Some apps have a lot of different repositories. Because think about it, if we have a lot of different data sources, for example, we have a few databases. We have the room database and we have a remote database. So maybe we want to create a repository that will only talk with these databases. But then we also want a repository that is going to talk with the network data sources. So some apps have more repositories and more DAOs and more data sources, but it doesn't matter. The structure is always the same, okay? We have some kind of repository, and if we have a lot of repositories, we can create some kind of general repository that will talk to all those mini repositories, and then we talk to the repository, and the repository is talking to the view models and sends them the data, and then the view model is sending the data to the fragment. It can be using live data or flows. It doesn't matter, callbacks, whatever you like. As long as everyone is responsible for its own thing, right? Everyone is doing its own thing. The waiters will never talk with the supply manager and definitely not with the suppliers themselves. Without MVVM, there's no rules. I mean, you can create a reference of the Firebase database inside your fragment. And no one will tell you that it's wrong, but it's wrong because it's not a good way to write the code. We need to create all of these layers of separation, layers of responsibility, because tomorrow I'm going to add another data source. So then what? I'm going to create a reference to all of these data sources inside the fragment. What if I want to change this fragment into another fragment? Then I need to add all of these data sources into the new fragment? No, I can just add new fragments, and all of these fragments will have view models that will talk with the same repository. So I can add things and remove things, and I don't need to care about the rest of the app because the rest of the app will still work as it is. So that's the point of MVVM. And I really encourage you to ask me questions in the comment section if something is not clear, if something is not really understood. Maybe I'm forgetting something, maybe because I'm very used to this, I think things are obvious, maybe I forgot some things that are not obvious, and in the past I didn't know about MVVM, so I just created everything inside the fragment, and the fragment looked like chaos, and I'm happy that now there's a better way, and I really know that when you understand MVVM, you're not going to create your apps differently. You're always going to separate them. You're always going to have this structure because it's a very good design pattern. So thank you for watching. That's all for this video. As I told you, I'm going to create another video that is going to apply dependency injection on this project, so you can learn dependency injection and you can make this app even more efficient. Maybe I'm also going to add other features, I don't know. So stay updated, subscribe, and see you next time.